history, apologetics, and current events. From the housetops, coming up next.
The history of St. Benedict Center and the slaves of the Immaculate Heart of Mary. St. Benedict Center was established to provide religious instruction for the Catholic students attending non-Catholic universities in the greater Boston area. It was founded in 1940 in Cambridge, Massachusetts, by a devout Catholic woman, Catherine Goddard Clark, with several lay collaborators. At first, they were not sure what form their work would take, but they knew there was dire need for a Catholic library and a meeting place for informal gatherings. They also saw the potential good that such a center could provide for non-Catholic students interested in learning more about church teachings. They chose the intersection of Bow and Arrow Streets, directly across from St. Paul's Church and only a block from Harvard University, for their location. With tentative approval from the pastor of St. Paul's, St. Benedict Center first opened its doors to 12 Harvard boys for a weekly study and discussion session. Other students expressed interest, and the program was expanded to include church philosophy and Latin classes several times a week. Attendance grew during the academic year, and in the fall of 1941, the Harvard Catholic Club was granted permission to have its meetings at the center on Thursday evenings. Catholic girls from Radcliffe College, a woman's annex to Harvard, also began attending sessions at this time. The center's work was blossoming beyond expectations. To reach its full potential, however, it lacked an essential element: a priest willing to devote his time to this important work. In 1942, the well-known and loved Jesuit Father Leonard Feeney became associated with the work of the center. At 45, Father Feeney was already famous as a great poet and writer. Almost every English textbook used in the thriving parochial schools of the time contained his poems and stories. He brought to the center the fruits of his scholarship, many years of study in the U.S. and abroad. As a master storyteller, with a great sense of humor, he filled his listeners with joy. Most importantly were the spiritual riches he shared: real holiness, priestly zeal, deep devotion to Our Lady, and an extraordinary gift as a spiritual director. Father Feeney made a deep and lasting impression on all who frequented the center. Here was the highly acclaimed author of numerous books and the dynamic speaker heard on NBC's radio program The Catholic Hour, humbly going about his priestly work with young students. With Father's spiritual direction, many boys and girls discerned the call to the priesthood and to religious life. At this time also, he began to receive a steadily growing number of converts into the church. One of the center's most renowned members was a convert and godson of Catherine Clark, Avery Cardinal Dulles, son of John Foster Dulles, Secretary of State under President Eisenhower. Reminiscing about the early days, Dulles remarked, "Life at the center had an indelible effect on all the associates. Before long, 100 members of the center had accepted vocations to the religious life, and at least 200 became converts to the faith." While teaching at the Jesuit seminary in Weston, Father Feeney found time to visit Cambridge, at first several times a week, but eventually every day because of so many appointments. Whether counseling, lecturing, or simply holding conversation, his love of sacred scripture and the depths of his theological insights were self-evident. His provincial superior, Father John McElhaney, later to become Archbishop of Jamaica, once referred to him as, quote, "the greatest theologian we have in the United States by far," end quote. Catherine Clark and her associates, therefore, were most grateful when Father Feeney was officially assigned as spiritual director of St. Benedict Center by his superiors and the archdiocesan authorities. Years passed, and under Father Feeney's guidance, the influence of St. Benedict Center at Harvard and other colleges continued to grow. After World War II, the work of the center became all the more intense, all the more necessary. The godless thinking that had given rise to fascism and communism was alive and well, not only in Russia and other European nations, but in America as well. It was flourishing right down the street from the center. At Harvard and other universities in the area where the doctrines of atheism, inspired by Marx, Darwin, Freud and company, reigned supreme. The morbid and destructive effects of touting this nonsense shocked the center associates. Many reports came to them of some students losing their faith and of others committing suicide. To do their part in combating these great evils, Father Feeney and all at the center were determined to give the clear, uncompromising message of truth revealed in sacred scripture, preserved by the Church's tradition, and proclaimed infallibly by the teaching authority of the Church. It was with this intention that they began publishing, in September 1946, the periodical From the Housetops, with the approval and blessing of Archbishop Cushing. Inevitably, conflict began to develop on several fronts. The first was Harvard, where a number of students who were associated with the center began to defend the faith and to challenge any teaching contrary to it. Some, especially those from influential families who had converted to Catholicism through the center, went so far as to withdraw from Harvard and other academic institutions to protest the anti-Catholic bias taught there. The resignations predictably caused no little upset, both to the universities and to the students' families. The center soon began to encounter opposition from where it was least expected. Auxiliary Bishop John Wright informed Father Feeney that there were complaints against St. Benedict Center, issues involving first the students who left their colleges, and second, certain articles in From the Housetops that supported the teaching, outside the Church there is no salvation. Was their teaching on salvation erroneous? No, they were told, but they had said something controversial. The fact that Father Feeney's strong message was the very reason so many converts had come into the Church was of no consequence in the events that followed. Harvard elites, among them liberal Catholics, embarrassed by the center's forthright teaching, apparently had little difficulty convincing Archbishop Cushing and the Jesuit provincial that something had to be done about the disturbance caused by Father Feeney at St. Benedict Center. Measures for restoring peaceful coexistence were deemed necessary. Father Feeney had to go. Expediency would triumph over truth and justice. It should be noted here that, having fulfilled the requirements for accreditation, the St. Benedict Center School was by this time offering college credits in several liberal arts disciplines, especially the classics. The number of students disenchanted with secular schools and now enrolled at the center was steadily increasing. Just days before the start of classes for the fall of 1948, without warning or hearing, Father Feeney received a letter in which he was informed by his superior that he was relieved of his duties at St. Benedict Center. This was shocking news to Father and to all his associates at the center. He had been already officially assigned to the center for the coming year, and now suddenly, and it seemed arbitrarily, was being reassigned. In a subsequent meeting with his superior, he was told that the decision could not be appealed because it had come down from higher authorities, no doubt from the archdiocese. When he asked what it was they objected to, he was told, "Your doctrine." "My doctrine about what?" Father Feeney asked, and this was the pertinent question his superior and others up the chain of command refused to answer. Catherine Clark was denied a meeting with the superior and had recourse to a letter in which she reminded him that Father Feeney was conscience bound to fulfill his commitments to the center for the academic year. She received no reply to the letter. If Father Feeney had gone astray, were he in error concerning doctrine, certainly he should have been corrected and given a hearing. Were Father Feeney and the publishers of From the Housetops out of line for upholding traditional Catholic teaching on salvation? Were they expecting too much by placing their confidence in their superiors for the answer to such an important question? Apparently, their only crime was having said something controversial. Lost in the decision to remove Father Feeney was the essence of Catholic authority and obedience. All authority has its source and model in God, a loving Father. Clearly, in refusing to even discuss the reasons for such serious reprisals, a bishop or other superior abuses his authority. The main issue was the infallibly defined teaching on salvation. Father Feeney was being sent from Boston for, quote, his doctrine. With much prayerful consideration and doctrine in the balance, Father Feeney and all his associates at the center agreed that doctrinal truth must take precedence over discipline. Confident that he would eventually get a hearing on the salvation issue, Father Feeney chose to delay compliance to a command calculated to give the impression that he or anyone else could be punished for professing the truth. Both his adherence to an infallibly defined doctrine and the authority of canon law undoubtedly protected Father Feeney and those associated with his work. As things developed and it became clear that discipline to the exclusion of orthodoxy was the policy of their superiors, they prepared to suffer the consequences, and suffer they did. While Boston College's theology department was taking issue with the literal teaching on salvation in From the Housetops, not a word was said about the egregious heresy taught by the faculty on its own campus. One Jesuit priest at BC, for example, informed his class that if anyone says there is no salvation outside the church, he is a heretic and cannot save his own soul. Students who had left the secular schools and had enrolled in BC were justifiably scandalized. They were expecting the truth, but they found themselves submerged in the vague, totally compromising message of liberalism. When faculty members at BC, who were also associates of St. Benedict Center, protested to the Jesuit authorities the blatant heresy taught there, they were summarily fired for bigotry and intolerance. For publicly defending the ousted teachers, Father Feeney was silenced and the center closed.
We'll be back with more From the Housetops after this break.
This is Deacon Bob Connor of First Concern Pregnancy Resource Center, Clinton and Marlborough, and you are listening to WQPH 89.3 FM, Shirley, Fitchburg.
Tim Kilcoyne, WQPH Radio 89.3 FM, with my voice a little lower here as I sit before the Blessed Sacrament in my hometown original parish of St. John, the Guardian of Our Lady, in Clinton, Mass. And my Christmas reflection for all of you as we approach the new year would be simply, what is it that we're giving and what is it that we're receiving? I hope all of you are able to give of yourself to those around you, most especially in your family, who are in need of spiritual help, just like everybody else, including ourselves. We can only assume that there's an internal struggle across in each and every one of our lives. And at Christmas time, maybe that cross can get lifted up by loved ones. Needless to say, Christmas is such a time of memories of our loved ones as well, and so many of the great people of our family ancestry who made Christmas such a wonderful, wonderful time because of their holiness and their love. Might we offer up our prayers to the faithful departed at Christmas to never forget how they made that time such a time of grace in our life. May we do the same for others. And may we receive the docility of the Holy Spirit at this beautiful time of year to renew our baptismal vows, our confirmation, promise to be a soldier for Christ, and to simply be that light in the darkness, not only at this time of year, but all the year through. And don't forget, 89.3 FM, EternalLifeRadio.org is in great need of your generosity, and we're just ever so grateful to our foundress, Mary Ann Harold, who, like Mother Angelica the Great, has been trooping along for many years and is truly at not only God's mercy, but yours as well, especially at Christmas and all through the year. Do make a donation. God bless you. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.
Hello, this is Kendra Von Esch. Joy. What a beautiful word. Small but mighty, especially when that joy comes from God. But what if you're not feeling so joyful? Call out to Jesus. I like the little acronym. Joy is Jesus, others, then you. If we keep Jesus first in our lives, if we invite Jesus into our lives and our tasks, our menial everyday tasks, and then ask Him to help us serve others and then ourselves, we will be filled with the incredible joy and bring it to the world. For more inspiration, go to kendravonesh.com.
On the WQPH community calendar,
the first annual WQPH 89.3 FN Strove Tuesday fundraising brunch. Yep, your WQPH family is going to be at Slattery's Restaurant in Fitchburg, Massachusetts, Tuesday, February 13th, starting at 10:30 a.m. There's going to be a nice filling brunch the day before Ash Wednesday. We will have a speaker there. The speaker has not been tied down, which is why I'm not telling you who the speaker is yet, but we will have a speaker there, and of course a priest to do benediction and so forth. You'll be able to meet members of the WQPH family. This is a fundraiser for WQPH. Now your tickets are going to be $45, or if you buy two, you can get two for $80. But there's a catch. Because we have to give them a total people by the 3rd of February. If you buy them after the 3rd of February, tickets are going to go up a little. You buy them before the 3rd of February, be $45 for a ticket or two for $80. You buy them after the 3rd of February, it's going to be a $50 a ticket or two for $90. Now you can get the tickets several different ways. There will be at several of the masses in the Fitchburg-Leominster area, there will be people with tickets. We're going to be visiting the parishes and see if we can be there and sell a few tickets at the end of some of the masses. You can, of course, buy the tickets online. There should be a button for buying tickets online at the WQPH website. That's WQPHradio.org. If it's not, then hit the donate button as normal and put down WQPH brunch. When you put down either your $45 or $80, or if you're buying a lot more tickets, amount that you're putting in, make sure you put down that you're getting tickets for the WQPH brunch. And we will be delighted to have you. And not only will we raise a few dollars for WQPH, but we'll be able to mix with you the people who we are out to serve, because that is what we're really out to do. We are out to serve the Catholics of this district, to help all of us get closer to God and closer to heaven, so that when our time comes, we'll be prepared. The first annual WQPH 89.3 FN Strove Tuesday fundraising brunch at Slattery's Restaurant in Fitchburg, Massachusetts, Tuesday, February 13th, starting at 10:30 a.m. You can, of course, buy the tickets online. That's WQPHradio.org. And not only will we raise a few dollars for WQPH, but we'll be able to mix with you the people who we are out to serve. And we will be delighted to have you.
Father Feeney's attempts to defend himself and the center were not successful. In his letter to the American assistant to the General of the Society of Jesus, and later to the General John Baptist Johnson's, his appeals to the clearing of the doctrinal difficulty were brushed aside as inconsequential. Again and again he affirmed his willingness to be tried. In a letter to the Superior General he states, "I am perfectly willing to appear before an impartial court in order to defend myself against the false accusations of my adversaries, if my judges do not persistently try to ignore the doctrinal controversy, for it is the basis of my so-called disobedience and the cause of everything that has taken place since last September." That due process, the right of a professed priest to plead his cause before an impartial judge in the Society of Jesus, should be denied Father Feeney was unconscionable. That he should be expelled from his congregation for protesting this injustice is incomprehensible. In 1952, Father Feeney was summoned to Rome by the Sacred Congregation of the Holy Office for a hearing. Again, he expressed his willingness to comply, in this case, when an accusation against him could be produced. Unless named as a defendant in some breach of canon law, Father Feeney was not bound to appear in any judicial process. In February of 1953, without ever knowing that he had been a party in litigation, he received word from the secular press that he had been excommunicated for disobedience. His appeal to Rome protesting this sentence and proving its invalidity received no response. In her book, The Loyolas and the Cabots, Catherine Clark assures her readers that retelling this story is no mere, quote, bitter statement of wrongs, end quote. It is a portrayal of a decline in the faith caused by liberalism, a denial of the authoritative teaching of the Church inspired by Protestantism and later modernism. Liberalism reduces the foundation of divine revelation and the infallible teaching of the Church to an evolving, personal religious experience. In this case, the divinely revealed, infallibly taught, and unchanging doctrine on salvation was too controversial for modern pluralism, and was thus deemed no longer valid for the times. Rome's response to the salvation question, a letter to Archbishop Cushing from the Sacred Congregation of the Holy Office, failed to address Father Feeney's contention that dogmas are to be understood by the very words used in defining them, and not in reinterpretation that destroys the original meaning. If this doctrine can be so reconceptualized as to lose its literal meaning, what is there to prevent other doctrines from suffering the same fate? Limiting this account to the historical facts, we will offer more on the theological controversy in another article. The unrelenting condemnation of Father Feeney in the media invariably portrayed him as a disobedient renegade. Catholic and secular press coverage of the story spread the utterly false claim that Father Feeney was excommunicated for teaching outside the Church there is no salvation. In the face of such slander, and having exhausted every recourse to their superiors, those duty-bound to be the guardians of the faith, Leonard Feeney and those who espoused his cause had only one last option: to remain faithful. Over 100 members bound together to continue their work, a doctrinal crusade. The date of this important development was January 17, 1949. They chose St. Louis Marie de Montfort's total consecration to Our Lady from his treatise True Devotion to Mary as their pledge of fidelity. The words of the co-foundress, Catherine Clark, explained the reason for this common dedication. Quote, "We were beginning to realize the character of the battle before us, not only for the preservation of the sacred dogmas of the Church, but actually for their restoration. It was to prepare ourselves by prayer and discipline, and to secure graces enough to enable us to face such a battle, that we became a religious order." End quote. The Slaves of the Immaculate Heart of Mary continued as an unofficial Catholic entity in exile. With fearless determination they defended the faith, even bringing their campaign to an open forum by preaching on Boston Common. Crowds gathered in the park every Sunday afternoon to listen to Father Feeney preach. The enemies of the Church, of every description, who were the most strident advocates of free speech, attempted to disrupt the talks with blasphemous taunts and insults, even spitting on him and his followers. The same indignities were also heaped on the image of Our Lady of Guadalupe the brothers carried in procession to the Common. Having persevered in their courageous witness to the faith in Boston for over 7 years, they turned their attention to other works of apostolic life. In January of 1958, the community moved from Cambridge, ironically, to the town of Harvard. They acquired a 300-year-old farm on a beautiful tract of land overlooking the Neshoba Valley, where they settled down to a semi-monastic life with private vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. Dairy farming and gardening helped support the community. They also received income from publishing devotional books, which they distributed nationwide. 10 years later, Sister Catherine Clark died. The co-foundress had been a constant source of edification and inspiration to the community. As an able administrator, she helped to coordinate the various projects of the apostolate and contributed in many ways a unifying influence. With her passing, and Father, now 70, in weak health, the community began to fragment. Disagreements between those devoted to the apostolic life are nothing new. Saints Paul and Barnabas went their separate ways, and there are numerous branches of many religious orders, for example, the Franciscans. With a complexity of issues that divided the slaves of the Immaculate Heart of Mary, one of the most important was what should be done to rectify the injustice of Father Feeney's excommunication. It was assumed that any course of action to resolve the case would be initiated by Father with the counsel of the community. Unknown to the founder, however, several brothers representing a majority of the members initiated negotiations with the hierarchy in the summer of 1971. The negotiations remained a secret, unknown to Father Feeney and the rest of the community, because they would have strongly objected to any need for reconciliation, since this implied the validity of the censures, that is, that there was a need for Father Feeney to be brought back into full communion with the Church. Father had officially appealed to the excommunication and had never thought himself to be outside the Church. That claim would have to be dropped by default, if the reconciliation were not in fact also a vindication of the beleaguered priest. A reconciliation approved by Rome was completed in 1972. In a regular Tuesday evening lecture at the center, with Auxiliary Bishop Lawrence Riley from Boston present, Father Feeney and everyone there recited the Athanasian Creed. Unknown to Father, this profession of faith was accepted as submission to church authority. The reciting of the Athanasian Creed was significant, for it begins, "Whosoever will be saved, before all things, it is necessary that he hold the Catholic faith, which faith, except everyone do keep whole and undefiled, without doubt, he shall perish everlastingly." This is the very teaching Father Feeney had supposedly misinterpreted, and, as some claimed, for which he had been put out of the church. Whatever else might be said about the reconciliation, the champion of the dogma, extra ecclesiam nulla salus, outside the church there is no salvation, remained ever faithful to his own cause. The original community split into several groups at this time. A majority opted to form men's and women's Benedictine communities. In doing so, they espoused the liturgical changes of Vatican II and chose contemplative life rather than the active apostolate of the original foundation. To all appearances, Father Feeney's crusade for orthodoxy was on the verge of coming to an abrupt end. The impasse that separated the original community was formalized by a legal division of property among three groups: the Benedictines, the Sisters of St. Anne's House, and our community. It was at this time that our refounding took place, with Father Feeney's blessing under Brother Hugh McIsaac. Overcoming great obstacles, Brother Hugh did everything in his power to perpetuate the original charism and apostolic work of the community. In 1976, he began to republish From the Housetops magazine, keeping the initial evangelizing spirit of the center alive. The impressive leadership and spiritual guidance of Brother Hugh was monumental, and about 10 new members joined that same year, 1976. The community was able to acquire property close by, where our chapel was built and Immaculate Heart of Mary School was started. Father Feeney remained in residence with the Benedictines during his last years. Having fought the good fight, the deeply revered and loved defender of the faith died on January 30th, 1978. The same year, Brother Hugh was diagnosed with terminal cancer, and on July 11th, 1979, he was called home to God after having set in motion in 3 short years a foundation and spirit that reflected the charism of the slaves of the Immaculate Heart of Mary. Brother Thomas Augustine Dalton was then elected the superior to succeed Brother Hugh. This concludes this week's program. Be sure to join us next week for the conclusion of the story of St. Benedict Center and the slaves of the Immaculate Heart of Mary.
From the Housetops is produced by the Slaves of the Immaculate Heart of Mary, Still River, Massachusetts.